All right, let's see here. Getting things started up. And yeah, looks good. Okay, cool. So today we are rebuilding this salaries page that we have for buffer.com. And Buffer, I joined in March this year as their design engineer. And we're going through a redesign of the entire marketing site. So today we're going to basically tackle this page. Buffer is a very open company. So we have transparent salaries, both internally and publicly. And so this is the page that we're going to be redesigning. So we have some introductory content at the top. We have this filterable table with everybody's salaries across all the teams. Some open roles at the company. We discuss our salary formula, our compensation philosophy, and we have a timeline of how we've evolved our transparent salaries over time. And then just a little CTA section at the end there. So this is what we're going to be rebuilding as people join up. And while we're waiting, I need to post that we're live. So just post across these. We can share this now. Let everyone know. All right. Cool. And while that's posting, let's take a look here. So we have our code that we're going to be working in, and we have our Figma design of the new design that we're going to be implementing, and we can get started right away. So let's see here. We also have, yeah, trying out cursor for the moment. Gone on and off using CodePilot tools. They seem to be useful for like really well-known use cases like TypeScript types or really common patterns, but I don't know, every once in a while I try it out just to kind of keep a pulse on things. So we'll give it a go today. In addition to cursor, we're using Polypane. Polypane will give us a look at all of our responsive breakpoints at once, which will help us do mobile first design, but also catch any layout issues as they arise across different breakpoints. What's the motivation behind the redesign? Basically, it's just time for it. I think that we want to freshen up the look and feel of things, and we want to be more bold, more ambitious with the look, just liven things up. So yeah, I think it's just something that we want to do in the open too. So we're iteratively rolling out the redesign. As you'll see, we'll be launching page by page basically. So yeah, I agree with that cursor. Sometimes the autocomplete is a little disruptive, so it's a little bit noisy at times. But diving in here, so this is our existing code. As you can see, this was imported into a monorepo, and it was converted to TypeScript at the time. So as a result, we have lots of expect error comments, and that's part of this redesign. Is let's also improve the code quality, improve accessibility, and so forth, get everything up to standard. So that'll be part of our work today. So looking at our design, we're basically going to work top to bottom is what I prefer to do, but we need to address the overall layout and kind of engage our new CSS styles. So one key thing with major redesigns is namespacing. And so you'll see that we have some of these components that are imported prefixed with old as the name. And that is crucial. So any components that you're going to want to overhaul, in order to keep everything in an always working state, we want to rename our existing components with something like an old prefix. And that'll free up the namespace for any new components that we want to implement. So let's see where this layout is being used. I'm going to jump down to old layout, and we have a component called layout. That's the new one. And so you can see that we freed up that namespace basically for any kind of ideal naming that we want to use going forward. So with that, we should have updated global styles. This is another measure we're taking with this redesign, is we want to kind of bifurcate our global styles. So we want to have our old styles in one layout and our new styles in another layout that we can opt into page by page. And that's kind of the mechanism we're using to be able to roll this design out iteratively. This gets us out of that bind of having a major redesign where you have to overhaul the entire website at once and then flip the switch. And every time you're making a content change, you're doing it in like two parallel realities. Instead, we want to basically redesign page by page and opt into the new design. So that way, if we have to make content changes or structural changes, we're only working with the main branch 90% of the time. So you should see that some styles will change, some styles will break because we're going to overhaul this basically. But that basically provides our global CSS such as new typography and some of the main container sizes. So let's get through and start overhauling this. So breakdown of this page is pretty straightforward. We are using React table for this filterable table, so we'll work with that. And then we have our layout, this hero section, our table section, and so forth. Let's go section by section. That's kind of how I prefer to get these things cleaned up. So I usually remove most code comments if they don't provide value. And we have these older section components. For now, let's just clean this up and see how little markup we can get away with and kind of simplify things down. So let's strip out some of these wrapping elements and see if we actually need those. Breadcrumbs, we should be able to update to a new component. So let's see if we can import that. And let's see here. If we dive into this newer component, we expect breadcrumbs as the prop. So let's get that updated here. And it looks like the shape of these might be a little different. So we need a URL and text content. And if we look at our existing content here, let's just switch this up. And let's see. So you can see for things like this where you're doing repetitive renames, the autocomplete is helpful. So I don't know, a little noisy at times, but just giving it a go. And that's part of a lean principle, is to just run the experiment. So, you know, you hear a lot of excitement around AI tools. Just go and try it for yourself, see if it holds up to your scrutiny. If it doesn't provide value, then don't worry about it. Let's see here. And lastly, there's this center prop, which doesn't exist on our new breadcrumbs. So if we flip back, should start seeing those come into place. And we stripped out all the kind of container styles, so we want to bring those back as well for this header. All right, let's see here. I'm trying to see if we have any color changes. So it looks like we can have the intro section, the salaries table, open roles all be within the same container. And then we'll have this full bleed background for our salary formula and kind of alternate between those. So it looks like we can contain these first three sections in a single container for now. And let's see here. So we're going to wrap all of these in a div, and we're going to overhaul some of the semantics of this code as we go as well. So let's grab, how many lines are we going to need here? We're going to go all the way down to our job board. Yeah, so let's grab these 100 lines here, put those inside a div. We'll give that a class name of container, which is just our global style for most layouts we use. All right, so you can see that constrained the width of the content. We still have some, background colors and things that we'd like to change up, but let me give that a refresh too. Okay, cool. So now let's hone in on section by section. Let's go through this intro section here. So we have our breadcrumbs. H1 looks good. That would be the semantically correct element there. We can clear out some of these styles. Instead of old badge, we have a newer version of that. And let's see here. Looks good. I think this one, if you look at the API of this new component, should just be able to pass in, as children, the text that we want. So I think we updated this. If we look at our design, global team is going to be the badge content. So instead of passing it in as a prop, let's close that out and instead have a global team. And we'll sentence case it, but the component itself should be responsible for any changes to the casing of that. And it looks like we're going to pop this out of here, so I'm going to move that out. Oh, back that up a little bit. We need to grab more of this component, basically. Yeah. So let's grab this whole chunk, and we'll pop it out of here. That should precede our header, it looks like. And it really doesn't want to copy paste. There we go. All right, so that will come above our H1. Looks good. Looks like we actually aren't using breadcrumbs on this page, so we could probably drop that entirely. And worst case, if we want them back, simple import to bring it back. That's a big through line you'll see as we work today, is we're going to have a very iterative approach. So we're going to do as much as we can to improve code quality and get things completely fixed up. But we can keep doing fast follows. We can keep shipping right to production as frequently as we want. So we don't have to hold on until everything is perfectly dialed in. And we'll also see that some of our design artifacts, there will be things that may not be pixel perfect, basically, and that's okay. We're going to rely on our design system, our design tokens, to define that, and we're going to infer if there's any ambiguity, what looks best in the actual final medium, which would be the browser. So that alleviates the need for all of your design files to be perfect 100% of the time. This is just a temporary, artifact to communicate just enough information for us to build it. So we're not going to be too precious about the design either. All right, let's continue on. Oh, cool. Looks like some of the team is joining in. Hey, everybody. It's fun to kind of co-work with everybody here. And it looks like we're getting rid of this link to our salary system, so we can just strip that out. The hero section will be pretty straightforward. I know right away that we can basically wire up some new styles for this. So one consideration is that we're moving away from styled components, which you can see here, and we're instead going to use CSS modules. So what we're going to do is we'll basically create a folder for this page. Right now it's just an isolated TSX file for the page, but let's actually create a folder with an index route in it. So we'll have salaries. Oh, it looks like that folder already exists. Oh yeah, it's stubbed out here. So instead we can put index.tsx in here, and we're going to port all of our content from this page over. So copy all this, paste it in, and we can actually now delete this file here. So now with our index file within this folder, that gives us the ability to add a salaries.module.css file. Did we think about Tailwind? We are sticking with just native CSS at the time. It gives us a lot of control over what we're doing. I've obviously used Tailwind in the past. Tailwind Labs was one of my clients for a year, so I've used that extensively. Every approach has its trade-offs. So Tailwind is really fast if you're doing repeated styles. It can be a little difficult if you need to have very finite control, because you have to do a lot of the arbitrary value syntax to kind of escape and do custom one-off values. So there's a little bit of trade-off there. I prefer to start with native CSS for most stuff if you're getting very precise around layouts and control and precision. Things that, especially for a marketing page context, you can definitely use Tailwind for that. But sometimes you need a lot of one-off exceptions. So I don't know, there's trade-offs to everything. I kind of prefer, in this case, for redesign, having the cascade available where we can define those global styles and have them inherited is pretty nice until you get everything really componentized. If you get everything really componentized, then your styling approach doesn't matter as much because it's already scoped down and it's more granular. You get a lot of reuse through components instead of needing the cascade. So I don't know, lots of trade-offs there. Let's see here. So yeah, with that, we're going to, let's just bring these style files over to the side so we can work on them side by side here. And let's see, we have our intro section. So this will be styles.intro. We'll need to get that imported because it doesn't want to bring that in place. So let's get that imported here. And we can start styling this up. All right, first thing would be our H1. Let's check up on the styles needed for that. So in our file here, we have step 4. Now our approach to typography and layout is going to be using fluid type and fluid layout scales. And I can actually show you what that would look like here. So we're using Utopia for this just to determine the scales. But basically this will give us responsive or fluid font sizes as well as spacing values. I'm actually going to, here I can pop this link in the chat if you want to check it out. So this is what we're using to determine our type sizes. And basically what this allows is the type to scale gracefully across all breakpoints. While all you have to really do is define a min and max value. So if we open a polypane, we can see that our typography will scale up as we increase the viewport size, but we don't really have to define any manual breakpoints for our typography. We're also doing the same thing for spacing, also using Utopia. So if I flip over to that, here's our space calculator from Utopia. And this will be used for lots of common padding and margin values throughout our layout. So that saves a ton of manual effort when you're doing responsive design, you don't have to define all the breakpoints for everything. So that's what you'll see as we start talking about steps in our spacing scale, basically. All right, so with that, we want our intro heading to have a font size. And we have variables for this, so this will be font size step 4. This is an instance where cursor is going to be a little bit noisy, so just trying it out today. May turn it off if I don't want it. And we should have our styles coming through now. Cool, looks good. Let's get our badge styled up there. Looks like we just need a theme for our badge. Yeah, we have our data theme property, which goes in and styles it. So in this case, I think our theme would be purple, looks like. Yeah, purple. Okay, cool. So our badge is going to have a style of, or a theme, I should say, of purple. Give that a look. Good. Looks like we've iterated on these badge styles a little bit. So as we're redesigning, we're also learning what we want to do with it. So now's our time, kind of as we go into each of these pages, now's our time to update these components so we can kind of evolve the styling of these things. So let's open up our badge styling here. Instead of a border radius of 0.25 rem, we're going to do border radius full. Padding will probably stay the same. And then one other thing I noticed is our text transform is going to be uppercase. So we left our actual content sentence case, and that way we have CSS to control us. And if we ever don't like the look of it, we just update the CSS instead of the HTML itself. All right, so it's looking better. It looks like our font weight needs to be increased probably. So I'm going to have to detach this style temporarily. We have semi-bold. And let's see here, font weight. And we'll have our semi-bold style there. And we'll probably have a little bit of tracking basically on this, which would be the letter spacing in CSS. Let's see if that's going on. Yeah, we have 1 pixel of tracking. So I think we have, if not, we can add it to our global styles here. So let's look at letter spacing as a variable. Letter spacing wide, perfect. Are we making it up as we go? Or is the refactor redesign done and you're demoing what's been done? We're basically doing it in the open. So we have done quite a bit of design work to establish the overall look and feel, but most of that design learning happened page by page as we were launching new landing pages and experimenting with these things. So we're still building out the redesign page by page and shipping as we go. And as we adopt new components, if we want to basically evolve the look and feel of the redesign, we can just have those inherit across those pages. So it's a very iterative approach. We're really focused on shipping as much as we can instead of holding on to the redesign and trying to deploy it all at once, which has a lot of trade-offs there. Yeah, good point about using sentence case also helps with the screen reader. So yeah, I always prefer for accessibility, keep your HTML content as clean and semantic as possible and use styling if you want to alter it from there. So let's see here. Another thing that you can do if you want to be extra cautious is you can actually look for the lang equals English attribute and only apply that style if the language is English. That would help with internationalization because casing has semantic meaning in other languages. So if you want to be very considerate, that would be another approach that's pretty common. We haven't quite tackled internationalization just yet, so I'm going to hold off on that, but that would be a consideration as we start to think about language translations. All right, and I'm trying to recall what I was working on here. Oh yeah, letter spacing. So let's get our letter spacing in here, and that would be letter spacing wide, I believe, was the variable name. Looks good. All right, cool. So that's our badge taken care of. Looks like we need some block padding, some vertical padding on this. Yeah, pair programming definitely helps to prepare for live streaming though. It feels very similar, except for I can't hear anybody, so just talking to myself. And let's see here. On the intro section, back to our salaries page. So let's get our intro styles going. And what we're going to do is do our padding block. So we're using our logical properties instead of having padding top, padding bottom. This will also help if we ever need to do internationalization, especially if you have right to left or left to right languages. And let's see here, we have our space step 5, step 7. So this is a cool thing with fluid spacing scales is you can define a step of your scale to be the min value and also a step to be the max value. So if a fluid spacing value of step 5, let's say it goes from 2 rem to 3 rem, is not enough of a difference across those breakpoints, you can also have these kind of spacing pairs. So we go from, let's say, 2 rem to 5 rem or higher. So we'll use that as our padding value on that top section. Looking good. And let's start thinking about the layout within this. So we have a column layout and all the content is going to be centered within that layout. So that's a great use case for Flexbox. I would reach for grid if there was more going on here, but in this case we could probably just get away with Flexbox. So we'll say the flex direction is column, and then our row gap, let's start off with a value of 3, which was equivalent to about 1 rem. It's kind of an interesting approach with fluid type scales and spacing scales is you really quickly kind of abandon worrying about the outcome, the pixel values. It's all about what looks good, what feels like it has the right vertical balance to it. So in our Figma files, we can infer some of those amounts if we remember them. But a lot of it is just kind of matching the feel and the overall rhythm of the page. Because when they're calculated, a lot of it's going to be very specific decimal values and things based on that fluid calculation. So we kind of have to let go of wanting to control every little pixel value there. So it looks like we have about a half rem of spacing between the badge and the H1, and then 1 rem of spacing between that and the text content. So what we'll need to do is wrap each of these in their own containing element, and that'll allow us to control the layout. So let's put our badge in our H1 in their own container. And now what we can do is control the row gap of equivalent of about 1 rem of spacing there, or about 16 pixels. And then we'll have our intro content leading is usually how I refer to it. And we'll also have our trailing content. And we can control the layout within these as well. Yes, Invia, I can hear you. All right, so we're going to need to replicate that same flex layout inside of here. So flex direction is column, and cursor bit me on that because it put in an extra semicolon. So not sure if I want to keep this tab completion going or not. Let's see, space step, I think 1 will do it for our badge in H1. And then inside of the trailing content, we need the paragraph spacing basically. So I think that would also be our space step 3. So let's copy this layout in and increase that to space step 3. And let's give this a look. Oh, we actually have to apply those styles as well. That would help. Content leading. So yeah, here's where autocomplete is helpful. It's just, back and forth, kind of a trade-off. I noticed that we have this escaped character for the right single quote. We've been basically just using the actual plain text character. So I'm going to copy that. And let's see here. Grab that. So let's replace that there just to keep consistent. And wrong spot. Oh, Vim sometimes can be real fun. Okay, so let's delete that out. Nice, looking good. Okay, getting further. Obviously, we need to align these to the center. As we saw, everything was stretching. So we'll just be flipping back and forth quickly as we work. Looks good. We'll have to do the same up top and in our leading content. Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's looking good. So that's pretty much the intro section. We might want to constrain, the max width is constrained by the container, but I tried to not have text go too far. We also need to add text line center, it looks like, to these. So we'll want to constrain that inline dimension or the width basically. So let's have text line center on our trailing content. That fixed that up. And looking at our design here, it's going pretty wide, but let's still cap that out just a little bit. So we want the max inline size, if we're using logical properties, to be maybe around 65 characters. So this would ensure a nice reading line length, make it more legible basically. That's pretty constrained. Yeah, we might have to let it kind of run wide then. I try not to go above 75 characters, so let's see how it looks with that. If you have the line length longer than that, it starts to look a little funky. Yeah, that would be readable, but I don't know, maybe we just let it run wide for now. So yeah, if we don't constrain that, let's see how it looks. Yeah, maybe 80 CH, that's a good point. We'll go a little bit beyond. I try to keep it between 55 and 75 for prose content or paragraph content. Yeah, that's a nice balance. All right, we'll go with your suggestion. You made it in. All right, let's see here. We can always refine those decisions easily. So yeah, I know I'm torn on centered text sometimes. Sometimes it feels like it's more harmonious. Sometimes when you have you know, remaining words that wrap to a new line, it can feel a little interesting. So yeah, always something we can revisit though. For now, we'll honor the design, and if we want to reconsider this kind of globally, we definitely can. Let's see here. So now we can move on to our salaries table here. Looking at our design, I noticed that it doesn't have a visual heading, but for accessibility, we'll want to retain that heading basically. And then we're moving our filters to be centered here. So looking at our current design, we have our drop-down filters where we can basically filter things down by team, by country, which is really interesting to see how our salaries scale globally. And yeah, we'll want this to be visually hidden then. So let's move on to our next section. Again, we're going to strip out these existing layout components as we start building out our new styles here. So we have our table section. We probably won't need this container because we constrained the max width above. And we're gonna have to clean this up as we go. And hopping back up there. Section row. Let's replace that with a div as well. There's not really a better semantic element for that. Let's see if we can wrap this whole thing in a section tag though. Let's see what all is included in here. So this will wrap the heading as well as the table itself. And yeah, this whole thing can be in a heading tag then. What's underneath this row? So this is where we have to be careful because we have to wrap these as two distinct sections. So this would be the first section here. I'm actually going to make this a section here as well as above. I'm going to do the same for the job board. And we'll add aria labeled by tags in just a second here. So let's get this fixed up. We have to jump back up. There's going to be a lot of scrolling today. Sorry for all the scrolling. And let's see here. So our opening tag would be this guy here. So this will have section. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, with any landmark element, you need to provide a unique accessible name for it. So we're going to use aria labeled by, and this will point to an ID of a heading that grants this a unique name for accessibility and for assistive technology. So this will be salaries table heading, and let's get that corresponding ID added to our actual H2 here. So now this goes from being just a generic landmark to one that has a specific accessible name based on the ID here. So we'd have Buffer Salaries as the name there. And let's do the same for our job board down here. You can see it's inferring those changes. This is an H3, which is incorrect. We'd want that to be at the same level as our salaries table, because this is a distinct heading, basically, or distinct section, I should say. So we'll want to get rid of that H3 in favor of an H2. Yeah, on the topic of pixel perfection, it is possible. When I did client work through agencies for Apple, for example, like we would overlay the designs onto the live page and we had to make sure everything hit pixel perfect. So it's definitely possible. Responsive design, you would have to account for every possible scenario and make sure those are all locked in. So it is doable, especially if you have a really clean baseline grid of 8 pixels or something along those lines. But with fluid design, it's nice because, you know, we haven't written any breakpoints yet. If we pull up polypane, this content, once we refresh here, looks like that needs to refresh. This content's already scaling across breakpoints for that intro section. So we still haven't written any breakpoints. For the table, we probably won't have to either because it'll just be full width with some overflow. So yeah, we'll definitely save a lot by going with a more fluid design approach, less manual management of the design here. So let's see, our buffer salaries heading is going to be visually hidden. So this keeps it accessible for assistive technology, but doesn't have any impact on the visual design. So if we flip that over, you can see that's gone now. We're going to want to center up these controls here and adopt new select styles there. That's really anxious. Are you talking about polypane where you see every breakpoint at once? It can be a little overwhelming, but it is helpful to get an overview of how everything is working. But yeah, lots of information. I feel like flipping back and forth. Usually I'll have Figma on my left column, code in the middle column, and then polypane on the right column. So I have all these screens up at once. That definitely gets overwhelming. But it's like a mini factory. We take it from design to code to live all in one screen, so that's nice. But for live streaming, I have to keep everything single pane here. All right. So we have our filters, it looks like. We have these select groups and select fields. Okay, so this is just a wrapper div, I'm guessing. Yeah, which we won't need to handle in the same way. Looks like we could probably just get away with, yeah, let's see, header groups map. Let's see how this is working here. So I'm skeptical whether we need this wrapping div. So let's go ahead and convert it over and see if we need to keep it. And we can get this cleaned up here. And we'll have to address our TypeScript errors as part of this work as we start overhauling. But that could be a lot of in the weeds. So maybe we'll get to that as we go. All right, this select field, we want to use an actual select. And we have a class name of select that we can throw on this to give it our global styles. And let's see here. Maybe this might be our option. Let me back up here and see. Is this our actual select? This is a div. So I wonder if this renders out as a select. I wonder how those are being handled. Let's inspect here. Let me zoom this way up. All right. You have no idea what's going on. That's okay. As long as it looks visually fun, that's all we're going for. So yeah, this does render out as a select element. Let's see how that's happening in the markup here. So what's interesting is our existing styled components have a div in place and then a select within. So it looks like, yeah, it's probably React table that's rendering these. So that'll be really interesting how we can change up the styling of that. I hope that we're able to pass the class name into that. Otherwise, this will be interesting. We might have to adopt this approach where we do a descendant selector to style that select. That'd be another way. Might result in a little bit of duplication in terms of styling. So let's feel that out here. Let's say if we go into our salaries table, we'll have our table filter, and inside of that, this will be our wrapper around this select that gets rendered out, I guess. So inside of that, we'll have our select that we're going to target. And let's grab our existing global styles. So we'll have select. Yeah, I don't really want to duplicate all of this, but Yeah, this would result in a lot of duplication, but I wonder how these are rendered. So this will be interesting to dig into here. I don't want to get too bogged down in troubleshooting because that's not the most fun thing to go through, but let's see what we got. So these definitely get rendered out by React table, it looks like. And let's see if we can find these. So our header groups, those come from use table, which is a hook from React table, which is the library for this filter table that we have here. And let's see what we can do here. Might roll the dice and prompt cursor to see if it has a thought. Because yeah, this is a pretty well-known library, so I might have an idea of how to handle this. Let's give it a go. So let's highlight this and let's prompt it. So let's ask, can we pass a class name to this column rendered by React table? See what happens. Yeah, I didn't really understand that, so that's okay. So yeah, sometimes it comes through, sometimes it doesn't. So our select field here, we're going to have to probably manually intervene here. So this will have a class name of table filter, and that will be how we're going to have to scope down these styles here. Select it in Command I. Yeah, that I think I've done that where it's in composer mode. That might be interesting to try as well. Let's see here. For now, let's duplicate these styles over, see if we can at least get feedback from the system that this is going to work. And the idea is to stay unblocked as much as possible. So we can always refactor and we can always improve our approach, but I don't like getting blocked. So let's see if we can at least prove out that we're able to target the select, and then we can always remove this duplication after the fact. So let's grab these next few lines of code here. And get these sorted out. Let's see if that gives us the styling we're hoping for. Okay, so that actually worked. So now we can say that we can actually target these elements, and we can always come back and figure out a better way to handle these styles, because I definitely don't like this duplication. But it gives us a little bit of feedback to move forward. So let's push onward a little bit here. So we'll have our table filters, plural, and let's handle the layout for those. Let's see what it does. So we don't want a column layout, and we'll want the column gap. Well, let's just define a gap, because on mobile, these might have to be flex direction of column, and we want a little space between those. So let's start with mobile. We'll open up polypane for this. Yeah, so that's too big of a gap, but you can see we will want a centered or a column-based layout for that. So let's align item center, and let's have a smaller gap between those controls. Still pretty big. Maybe not going to need too much of a gap between them. Let's try it with no gap at first. Obviously, we need a little bit then. So what is our smallest amount that we could do? Step 1 might be, that's still too big. Is there perhaps a margin on these? Let's take a look. All right, so now we're in DevTools within Polypane, which gets even more overwhelming, but is sometimes helpful. Interesting. So I'm noticing that there are more filters being rendered out than what we have. So that means our conditional rendering logic is off, and that's good feedback. So let's see what we got going on here. This is the thing with existing code, is we have to kind of double check everything that we have inherited here. So it looks like we're mapping over every header group, and then for each column, we ask if it can filter. So what we want to do is move that check to be outside of this div, so we're not rendering these divs at all if we can't filter. So let's do that. Column can filter, and instead of doing a ternary where we return null, we can just do a truthy evaluation here and simplify that down a good bit. And I always forget in JSX it's many layers of wrapping. So let's delete out some of these pieces here. Now it's happy. And what we can do is now get rid of this check internally, and this will get simpler inside there as well. So now if we check at the outputted markup of that, we should, oh, and that went away entirely. Interesting. Okay. So that's unexpected, because, yeah, let's back that up again and see if we can get it in a working state. So when we do this approach, we have every column is being looped over, and we're asking if it can filter. We're going to render filter. So let's see here. And this is currently resulting in a bunch of divs that are empty. So let's see if we can get that conditional rendering to work as expected. Popping this out. So column can filter. And if it can filter, then we return this markup, which is what we just did. But let's see if, just trying to sneak my way up to it to see if it'll work for our purposes here. And let's drop these pieces here. Yep, we'll come back. That error is going to change as we modify this a little bit. So let's see what we have. Okay. Okay, so that worked. That was interesting. It must have been just that wrapping curly braces, I guess. That's the thing with JSX. Once you get nested in loops, sometimes it's hard to keep track of your actual syntax that you need. Okay, so now we're only rendering the divs as needed, and we can get rid of this internal condition now. Let's make sure that works. Yeah, we have that ternary. That's no longer necessary. Okay, cool. Awesome. So now we're looping in these wrapper divs. I think we can get rid of those too, and actually let's just have the descendant selector come off the parent. So any chance we can get to simplify this markup, I guess we will need something with a key. I wonder if we can do a fragment with a key. I don't believe that's a thing. Can we do this? I guess we can. That's interesting. It might just need it for that initial iteration, and then it'll dispose of that after. So then if we do that, then all we need to do is update this selector to be table filters, plural, and that gets rid of some more markup that we may not need. All right, let's see how we're doing. Yeah, multiple truthy conditions over ternaries. That's definitely my preference as well, especially, and if we were to look at like fully expanded code, if you can just have if statements without any else's or nested conditions, it's so much easier. Cool. It looks good. All right. So now we just have fragments rendering out. Our styles are still inherited. Now we have no wrapper divs around it, so simplifying our markup down. And another thing I just realized is that these selects have no accessible name at all. So we probably want to define labels for these. They're gonna have to be visually hidden, but if you're a screen reader user and you focus these, you wouldn't have any context as to what they control. So let's go ahead and improve that as well. Now this will be interesting because we're looping within. Yeah, okay, this will be interesting. So what we might need to do is we'll have this fragment that'll render out the select menu. This will have a HTML4 attribute because we're in JSX. And we're gonna have to think through if we can get that accessible name now. So to back up a little bit, let's see if we can log out what we have available to us on these columns. And that'll help us inform what we can actually say. So the header is available. So that gives us a lot of control. And then we need some sort of unique identifier for the for attribute. Yeah, duplicated IDs. Interesting. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, we have our column itself, which probably want that to be our header because that would be the object. And let's see if we have any other data on this. All the rows, yeah, everything gets. Okay, so that actually does have a nice ID. So let's use that. So we have label, HTML4, the column ID, and this will be the column dot header, I believe it is. And see if these selects already have an ID on them, I believe. Custom select. Ooh, we're gonna get burned by the library. So we can't control that ID. That's a bummer. Yeah, I see what you mean. This is becoming, yeah, that's perfect. That's why I like streaming. It's just one big pairing session with everybody, troubleshooting. Okay, so interestingly, and I think our header field was capitalized. So libraries sometimes, they'll get you. All right, so we can at least render that out. So now we have labels. We don't want these to be visually shown. So let's use visually hidden. But that ID is going to be a real sticking point for us because if we can't control that, the rendering of this, then we're not going to be able to label these. So that's interesting. This is why I'm usually pretty library averse. It's hard to get control over accessibility at times. This is probably better than being in an actual paired programming session because you can just block everyone else out until you're ready. Actually, I would prefer if I could hear some feedback in real time. Otherwise, I have to keep reminding myself to keep track. So maybe not if everyone was talking at once, but yeah, I definitely don't mind mob sessions. They're actually pretty helpful. Yeah, those duplicate IDs are going to be a real sticking point. So we'll have to evaluate this library in general. I'm going to actually have to mark this as to do because that's probably beyond the scope. I really want to get into styling the table, but you know, likely later today after the stream, I'm going to go in and see if we can actually control the rendering of these because that's going to be a real sticking point for accessibility. So I rarely leave code comments, but this is a good use case for it as I'm actively working on this. So let's mark this as explore if we can modify the select ID for accessible naming. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I'd like to have control over that. That's where I really prefer compound components from libraries, where you actually can grab each element and pass in whatever attributes you need to control, because this won't do. So now, responsive design wise, we have it in a column layout. Looks like we need to text align center that heading also. Lots of jumping around, but you're just kind of managing all this inventory at once. So it's always a game of how much context can you hold in your head. Let's text align center that. That was not what I wanted to autocomplete. There we go. All right, so header's fixed up. Go back to our select dropdowns. So we probably want to keep those only in a column alignment until about this breakpoint, so 36 rem or so. And let's see, so these are our filters. So we'll say at media, min width, 36 rem. I started using rem for all of my media queries. It used to be the case that it wouldn't work in certain browsers, so I was using M for a while for the best that I could get, but it seems to be stable as the last couple of years, so it's good I revisited that decision. Let's see here. We have our flex direction as row now, and our gap should be the same. Cool. And we now need to justify content center that because we're in a different flex axis. Looks good. Now, the layout between these, between the filters and the table, should probably be handled by the parent element. So let's look at what we have available to us. So we have this wrapper div. That's for the filters. This is for the table. Okay, so we might want to wrap that in its own element so we can control that layout. And then we'll have our salary sheet link. So let's see where that comes into play. That would be after the table, I believe. So we'll want that to be part of this. Yeah, want that to be part of the table content. So we're gonna have to have a couple of nested divs. I should have done that up higher. That would have been better. Let's see here. So we have div. Give that a save. Okay, so that's the wrapper around the table and the link. Now let's wrap our select filters. And we actually don't need this outer div now because we are wrapping the labels themselves. So it looks good. And let's wrap that around all of our table content as well. So that'll pop down to here. Looks like I'm missing a closing tag still. Oh yeah, it's just that error up here actually. Okay, cool. So checking that out should not have any visual impact. We're good. All right, so now we can control the layout of these. So this will be class name. This will be our salaries table container. Salaries table. Yeah, naming is always fun. And you don't even, with Tailwind, you don't get away from naming. You just have to figure out where components are named anyway. So you always have to figure it out anyway. That set timeout. Yeah, I want to look into that. Where do we see a set timeout? Ooh, for the, yeah, we have to have a delay for that inner HTML. I'm guessing that's to defer the script. We could probably use maybe a defer attribute here instead of a set timeout, So I'll have to look into that, because there's a way with scripts to basically check that all other content is loaded, and then you load in those scripts, or then you render the content of it, and that's to prevent them from being render blocking. So yeah, I definitely want to explore what's going on with that set timeout. But you always uncover fun stuff when you're going into legacy code. It's all good though. We'll just keep iterating and get these things cleaned up. So let's see here. So we have our container. We need to do the layout between the filters and the table. So let's go back here. So we at a higher level. We have our table container. Let's do, yeah, flex layouts. Flex layout's fine because it's just one dimensional. We don't need row for that. And center probably won't really play a role. Let's see how this looks though. Checking this out. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Let's check our design. Maybe a little more space between them. I do want them to be closer to the table than the preceding content, just for, you know, associating them visually. So maybe we'll stick with that at the moment. And let's see here. Yeah, I think we can get into styling our table itself, which will be fun. So the current styles, salaries table, our table wrapper, that's what we're looking at here. So we have a div, our data table. There's another thing with styled components I'm really not a fan of, is you have this huge separation of what your actual HTML is. They're all tucked into the styles. It's kind of the opposite of Tailwind. It's like you brought your HTML into your CSS. So it makes it very hard to audit accessibility, because now you have to reference two files to know what the semantics are. So let's see here. So yeah, we're probably gonna just remove as much of this as we can get away with, and that way we can start fresh with the styles. Basically, you can migrate styled components to CSS module code, but I'm going to be changing things like all these properties need to go from explicit height and width to being logical properties. We don't want pixel values, so those would all be rems or our fluid scale. And we're also changing the appearance. So it's limited value in migrating this to CSS modules. I'd rather go down the page linearly and just style it basically from scratch, kind of clean slate. It actually can be faster in a lot of cases. So let's see here. Right, rule of proximity. Yeah, that's great. That reminds me of I think it's John Yablonsky who has the laws of UX. So that's definitely relevant. All right, let's see here. So the table will be fun. We have these rounded corners. The header has this dark appearance. I believe this is a sticky header where each table head cell has position sticky on it, which would be cool. And then we have overflow within the table itself. So that way it has a constrained maximum height to it. And we'll get into styling the cells as well. And just checking, we're doing good on time. We'll probably go until 10:30 Pacific time, so another 40 minutes or so. Let's see how much of this table we can knock out. I think this will be the most fun part to style anyway. And we'll definitely have some fun TypeScript errors and things to resolve after that. So let's give this class name of salaries table. And let's see what we need to style. So my experience with tables is we'll probably need this wrapper div to give it the rounded appearance and to clip it with overflow hidden to give it that outer border as well. Tables can be really interesting. I think that'll be necessary for the responsive design in particular. So if you look, we removed our existing styles from this. So now we just have a bunch of overflow. So to get that back, you basically have to have a wrapper div that allows that overflow in the X direction to occur. So that's my assumption as we go through this. It can be really tricky though at times. I'm gonna call this container. And let's see if we have luck with this. Oh, I already used that name, didn't I? Okay, so this gets more interesting. So this will be the salaries table content. Let's call it that. And rename over here as well. Cool. And then we'll have our filters. So after this filters content, we'll have our actual salaries table container. So this will likely need to have the overflow X auto on that for responsive design. And we'll need to have, what else will we need? We might provide the border and the border radius at this level. Let's see if we can get, yeah, because I don't believe we can do that on the table itself. So to demonstrate, if we did the salaries table, which is our table element, and we said the border radius would be one of our stops in our border radius scale here. So it's a border radius medium, likely. Let's double check on that in a second. And then we said overflow hidden on this. Let's see if this actually takes. And we might have to put an actual border on it to get some of that feedback. So let's say border width is going to be equivalent to 1 pixel, 0.0625 rem. When you work with rems long enough, you just start thinking that way no matter what. Border style is solid, and the border color is going to be our color gray. It's funny, we haven't had to do any colors just yet, so we're getting away with a lot so far. All right, so you can see that doesn't really have an effect on the table. So when we're styling the table itself, the border radius and the border probably aren't going to take. So that's my assumption, is we'll probably need that on the level of the container. And we might need multiple containers depending on how this works. Okay, so now you can see the border radius and the border. Yeah, it's just working with rems for a while, you get used to it. Are we hiring? Yes, we are. So on this actual page that we're redesigning, if you go to buffer.com/salaries or buffer.com/about, we have a couple open roles at the moment. So feel free to apply if you're interested. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so you can see that table wrapper or container was necessary to give us that border radius and border. And if we go to polypane now, hopefully we have a little bit of functionality. Yeah, you can see now we actually account for, I'm horizontally scrolling right now, which you can't tell, but yeah, we actually account for that overflow basically. So that's interesting. At times I've needed an additional wrapper. I think when we wanted to do scroll snapping and other things in the past, but yeah, I think we can get away with just one for today. I try to question those assumptions as often as I can. Less things to manage. All right, so we have our container. That's looking good. And now let's start pulling out our specific styling. So we'll probably jump right into the table head cells. These will be interesting, I can already tell right away. Because these don't extend the full height of the table cell, we probably can't use a border, so we'll probably have to use a span and position those to the right edge. Yeah, that'll be interesting. Let's get into the table head now. And if everything is correct, we probably dropped our styles for sticky headers and stuff. So we'll want to reference our older styles just for those few things. We won't need border collapse because that's global styling, but we will need to think about position sticky on these and position relative on the table itself. Yeah, so just kind of anticipating some of those needs now. All right, so we have position relative on our table, and then we have control over all of this. So instead of doing a bunch of descendant selectors, I'm actually just going to target these directly. So we have salaries, table, header cell, and let's make sure we can get the sticky positioning working before we go too far with it. So I'll have position sticky. Instead of top 0, let's use inset block start as a logical property. The Z index I like to keep as low as possible, and I won't worry about background color just yet. Let's see if that took. And oh, we don't have overflow. We don't have scrolling on the table vertically yet, so it will never take place. So we'll have to constrain that max height basically. Let's see what we want to do for that. I'm guessing, I don't know if we want to have the same height across all breakpoints, so this might be something that we update with breakpoints. We could also make it relative to the viewport width, which may have some interesting implications, but that's another possibility. So it looks like roughly a square aspect ratio on this table. Let's put in just an initial max size value and see if that works for us. So this will be on the parent again. And let's say max block size is going to be, what would be a good value? So like 1200 divided by 16, 75 rem. It seems a little high. So let's maybe try like 60 rem to see how it feels. And we'll need to add overflow auto to both dimensions. So we'll just make that overflow auto. Okay. So we can see that the sticky position is not working just yet. So we'll need to investigate that. Let me close DevTools here. And I feel like on mobile, we definitely don't want it to be this tall. So let's constrain the height on mobile further, and then we'll figure out what we want on larger screens. Exactly. That's a really good point. Make sure the table itself doesn't occupy the full viewport, because then you're stuck scrolling with inside of it. That's a really good usability point. Yeah, so I think we need to constrain it to be quite small on mobile, maybe show a few rows. But you can see on a pretty small breakpoint, this would be like iPhone 4S size, this leftmost viewport here. So this is kind of the smallest I usually design to is 320 still. So that would give you the ability to scroll past it, which is good. Yeah, if we wanted to be really safe, I wonder how this will work. Let's try this out. So we could say we want it to be no larger than 50 dVH, which is the dynamic viewport height. And or actually we could say DVB now, which is the dynamic viewport block size. Logical properties become a mouthful, but basically what this means is that it should grow no larger than 50% of the viewport, even if they have like the app drawer open or the keyboard open. It'll take into account the dynamic sizing of that. Oh, I'm getting tired, so sorry for the misspeaking. But yeah, let's try that out. So on mobile-ish breakpoints, it'll be no larger than half the screen size, basically. And let's see what we got going. Yeah, so DVB, that's a great new logical property you can use for sizing. Highly recommend. We'll do that, and then we'll probably let go of that on desktop, or maybe it'll look good on desktop. Let's just evaluate that. Yeah, I think once we get our rows styled, we'll know how many rows we can fit in visually, and that'll determine if we want to increase this sizing or not. So on larger screens, I actually don't mind that though. So maybe we'll go roughly with that across the board. All right, let's see. So now we need to troubleshoot our position sticky on the table head cells. And let's see how we achieved that in the past. So this is where referencing old code. I can't always remember how to get these sticky headers working. So we have position relative on the table, and the head cell has a top -1. That's probably just visual. The index is 9. I feel like that's overkill. Interestingly, I don't see anything else that we would need on there. So position sticky, position relative on our table itself. We have our z-index. Our top is 0 there. And let's see if we have anything else that we require for this sticky positioning. Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure why it's not taking, actually. Let me pull it up in Arc just to see if... Yeah, it's really odd. So not sure what the difference is there between our old code and our new code. So that'll take some troubleshooting there. So we have overflow Y scroll, max height on the table wrapper. That matches what we did pretty much exactly. And let's see if we have anything else here. Border collapse looks good. I think that's already inherited with our global styles. So let's investigate here. So if we grab our table, yeah, border collapse is part of our global styles, so that won't be a factor either. This is a fun thing with libraries too, is it's a table element, but they put a row of table, which is really redundant and unnecessary. Looks like we will want a max or a width of 100%. So let's add our inline sizing to our table. So inline size is going to be 100%, and hopefully that extends it out. Yep, there we go. And let's see what else we want. Yeah, that position sticky is a bit of a mystery. Let's continue styling, and I'll need to investigate that as we go. So we have our background color, and we'll have some padding on these cells. We'll need that fake right border that's inset, so that'll be fun to do. Yeah, let's get into that. So I'll start with the typography and we'll work our way out with padding and so forth. So typography, I'm going to detach this just temporarily. So that's our heading font, about a 20 pixel font size, but in our fluid scale, that'll vary. And I'm going to call this table head cell. That'd be more accurate instead of header cell, which is here. So inside of here, we're going to work on our font size, and this will be probably step 1, I'm guessing. We're going to have a font family of font family heading, and a font weight of our font weight for the headings as well. Line height, same thing. So we're kind of inheriting all the properties of what we would have for our heading typography. Font size can hang out here, and that should be it. Yeah, because we don't modify tracking on these. So let's take a look at what we got. Looking good. It's maybe a little large, so I might just keep it at the default font size, and we'll evaluate from there. That seems more reasonable. Now we need to invert these styles. So this is going to be color white, so that'll go away for a second here. Yeah, that's true. We could use some pseudo selectors to target the left border of an element and things, and then provide the padding with the table head element. That'd be interesting. Yeah, let's maybe give that a go instead of having to create empty elements we have to hide from the accessibility tree. Yeah, I like that suggestion. All right, let's see here. Cool. Yes, we're doing well. Now our typography is white, so we need to bring in the dark background color, which will be at the table head level. So we have our salaries table head. Target that directly. This will have a background color of that color grade 900. Autocomplete is a little noisy again. Still feeling out whether I like that or not. Cool, looking good. Now let's try that suggestion out. So no, don't apologize. I actually think that's a really good point. So let's add, in that case, and there's no perfect way to approach this stuff. It's just whatever feels like the right balance of complexity versus, you know, making it intuitive and things. This is probably a more straightforward approach actually. So let's see, we have padding block. Let's add a little bit of spacing here. I don't know if that took. And T-head may not be able to accept, yeah, it doesn't accept padding values, that's right. So this will have to be in the padding of the cell itself. So let's put that on the cell. Yep, so you can see that's the case there. Now another thing I'm noticing is, this might get tricky because we don't want our scroll bar to be on the entire table in this case, because that would look odd. As you can see, it's overlapping our table head. So we might have to, this would be tricky. I don't know if we can detect it within the table. Tables are always fun with layout. So let's see if we can get away with this. So we have overflow X auto on our container. And then our table body is going to have to be the one that is responsible for that overflow Y of auto. And let's see if this takes. If not, this will be a tricky one to pull off exactly how we want to. So table body, is that really extending up all the way? Let's see. Let's double check what we got going on. So our table container, overflow X is auto. So we might actually have to say that overflow Y is hidden even, because it's probably naturally allowing for that to occur. So let's move that up. Let's see if that's the case. All right. So yeah, we're not getting scrolling on the body. That's interesting. Yeah, I'd be interested if you've been able to pull that off on the body itself. How that worked. Yeah, tables are a fun one. So let's see, because those styles should be getting applied actually on our T-body. Overflow Y is auto. And if we force it to scroll, will that even take? May not. This might be a tricky one. We'll have to think through visually what we want to do in this case, because they'll definitely affect the styling of this, the appearance there. Let's see if we have Yeah, padding top to account for the header. Yeah. So yeah, we have padding top now, or padding block, I should say, on the table head cell. And let's see what else we need to do here then. That layout's gonna be tricky. I think for now, let's revert to where we can at least scroll it. Sorry for all the back and forth. And we're gonna have to troubleshoot that further, because that's not necessarily what we're going for. And we had both dimensions, yeah. Yeah, it's not bad on Mac OS where, you know, you have these very visually light scroll bars, but if you have it enabled to always show the scroll bar, or if you're on Windows or Linux, it's gonna look a little odd. So this will be our initial approach for now, just to get it working, but definitely want to revisit that. So we're accruing some things to investigate after the stream is over. All right, in the interest of styling though, let's push ahead on that. So these are left aligned with padding. Okay, let's get a sense of what padding values we want on these. It's gonna be inaccurate because it's not gonna be the full cell width that we want. So let's take a look at what we have. And that'll actually be based off of some of these internal elements. Yeah, it looks like about 3 rem of padding. These inset borders will be fun because those will have to be mimicked basically. So, this will be interesting. I think what we're gonna have to do is style the table head cells themselves. Typically you could do a border between each row, but in this case, we don't want them to extend the full width. Let's see if we can put that padding on the body then. So what I mean by that is we want some padding inline on the body. And let's see if that takes. I can never remember. Yeah, T-body doesn't accept it. It's always on the cells with tables. So that means that we have a row cell that's going to have to be responsible for the padding. So we have our TR and then our TD class name. Yep, there we go. So that'll be responsible for the padding at the cell level. And is this taking? I think it is. We're probably just zoomed out here. So let's make sure that actually is coming through. I can inspect it in ARC. That'll be a little easier. Yeah, Windows is very obvious with their scroll bars. That's for sure. Yeah, so that's taking on the cell level. And whatever we do on the cell in the rows, we'll have to match to our header to get that left alignment. So for the cell itself, to get those borders, we're going to have the cell provide the padding. We're going to need to wrap our cell contents and then have an element that provides that visual border, because those borders are inset from the edge of the table. So sometimes you have to do these things to get this more unique look going, but I think it'll be worth it. So we're going to wrap our cell contents in a span, and then the border will actually be a 1 pixel high element that's hidden from the accessibility tree. And so on the first and last cell, we will use those pseudo selectors as suggested earlier. We're going to have to make sure that they only extend to basically the padding of the cell. And I'll explain that as I go, but just thinking out loud. Okay, so we have our padding provided by the cell, and this might be all around. Let's check roughly our padding values that we need for this. Yeah, about equivalent padding there. It might be a little more than what I have here, but we'll get that to be in place first, and then we can always bump it up. All right, so it's already looking better. I noticed, and I'm jumping down to the cells of the rows because I want that to inform the alignment of the table head itself. So I want those to visually match up. And what we can do if we want those to always be in sync, this is something that I often do, is I'll create a CSS variable. So let's say this will be cell padding inline. And I prefix it with an underscore to mark that this is kind of a private variable for this particular part of the DOM tree. And let's say that this is our space step 3. It's funny when I do more advanced CSS, cursor doesn't give any suggestions. It has no idea where I'm going with this. So let's see. So we'll use that variable there. And then in our table head cell, that allows us to use it here as well. And this will keep these two in sync. So if we want to modify that, we know their alignment will match now. Yeah, so you can see that alignment. The only thing is we have text align center on our table head cell. So we'll use text align start is what we want. There we go. So now if we need to update the padding, that'll inherit across the board to keep that left alignment looking good. All right. We have about 15 minutes left. Let's see how far we can get. So we already have our cell contents wrapped in a span, which is nice. So we'll create another span. This will be aria hidden equals true to keep the accessibility tree nice and clean. And class name, let's call this our salaries table cell row cell border. Yep, looks good. And then we have our row cell content. Perfect. Now that I'm thinking about this too, we're gonna have to think about for the cells that are not the first or last, we want that border to be continuous. That'd be interesting. You'd probably do it with absolute positioning or something in that case. But yeah, we're definitely doing some nuanced design inside of here. So our options are we could instead have the padding be on the cell content. I think that'll probably be the easiest thing then. So we're gonna have our salaries row content. We're gonna move the padding to that. And then our salaries border, we're gonna have that be display block position absolute, and then inset block end inset inline is what we want. Let's see if that took, well, we need a height on that as well. So the block size of this is equivalent to 1 pixel in rems. And we want the background color as well. So background color is going to be that 900. Let's get these sorted a little bit. I try to sort my properties as best I can, just logically. So let's see what we got going on here. All right, so let's see why those aren't appearing. We have our name cell and our border, position absolute. We need a position relative, that's why. So that would be on the cell itself. Relative. See if those appear. Okay, cool. So we've kind of faked the border, but this will give us control to make that inset as needed. And now we can investigate why our padding isn't taking, basically. So that's probably because we have these existing styles that we probably need to strip down still. So we'll have to look into the render method for that cell. That might be another tricky thing with our table library here that we have to overcome. And we're using the index as the key, which we shouldn't do because that changes on re-renders if things are added or deleted. So we don't want to do that. So we're gonna have to look into what we actually have available to us on the cell to create a more meaningful key for React to keep track of. So let's take a look at this real quick. Are we still logging? No, we're not logging anything else out. Okay, so this is our cell itself. We have a value and anything else. Maybe the column header plus the index. I'm trying to think of what would be a unique key. Yeah, maybe the row ID would suffice. Let's double check that that's unique across these different cells. So we have a row ID. Oh, those are the same actually. Okay, this will be interesting. I'm trying to find a unique identifier. Yeah, it seems to be logging out quite a bit. Let's refresh and see. Header plus row ID. Yeah, that might work. That might work. Should be unique, I think, but it's interesting. It seems to be logging out everything. So I'm suspicious of that. I'm not sure why we're logging everything else out. So we have our cell.column.id. Not sure if that's what we want. Yeah, those are repeated. Okay, so we have to make note of that as well. Again, I'm not trying to bog us down too much on the styling topic, but got some to-dos. All right, so improve key in loop below. Okay, so back on styling. Yeah, you can see we're also addressing some legacy code as well. All right, and then let me back up my changes. Actually, looks like we messed something up. Cool, there we go. All right. So we have our rows, and padding inline is no longer taking, so let's take a look at that. I wonder if we add to our cell itself display flex. Wow, that's really not what I thought would happen. Okay, so let's take a look here. We have our row content and our salaries border. Okay, so let's try it with a flex direction of column. Wow, that's interesting. On the row cell, it's going to affect it like that. Okay, man, tables are always fun. So we have a padding value that's not taking at all. And our border is appearing as expected. If we dig into this, we don't really have much layout going on inside. That seems fine. Yeah, very interesting. Wonder if there's other styles being inherited. Let's see here. Is it because the span is not a block level? Potentially. Yeah, let's try that out. Good call, good call. Thank you. That really saved me. Okay. We're mobbing. We're pairing up together. That was great. All right. Yeah, I forgot because that didn't have a flex layout on it, so its display type was native. Thank you. That was perfect. Okay, so now we have these going. And what I'd like to do is these first and last cells of each row, we want that border to be inset visually a little bit. So probably gonna have to double up our padding, it looks like. And then, yeah, we want this alignment. Looks like it got shifted a little bit in our design file. But I'd like this nice left edge with our table head content and these avatars. And then it looks like we have a little bit of that extension of the border underneath. So in that case, what we'll want to do is double up that padding. And this is actually just, we can actually just call this padding in general because we're using it top and bottom. So we'll want to double that up, or at least go higher with that value. Cool, so that's more inset now. And then on our border, so this is on the content, and then on our border, what we want to do is say for this element, this will be our table row cell that is the first child or first of type. So we're going to target the table cell itself. We're going to grab our border and we're going to modify its padding inline start to be spacing value. See if that took. Okay, might have issue. Yeah, we might actually have to select that. One thing with CSS modules that's tricky is you can't really reference nested selectors because it hashes these. So if we look in our actual rendered DOM, these receive a hash and they get translated a bit. So that makes it tricky because you can't really select them in the same way. That's where you might have to use a bare attribute selector, but yeah, this could get really interesting. So we could say like span last of type. This is starting to get a little messy, which I'm not a huge fan of this approach. And then we would need to, these already display block as well, so they should be able to receive padding. But the background color is going to be tricky for us. A lot of engineering just going into these borders. That's always fun. So what we might have to do is nest this now. Yeah, when this happens, we have to be very careful of complexity because it can be quite involved just for a small visual treatment. So, you know, sometimes you got to go back and ask from a design perspective, is this what we want to achieve? You know, is this worth this much complexity? Sometimes it is. Sometimes, you know, maybe it was not really something that we're that committed to. So let's take a look here. We have our last of type, and then we'd have to then apply this on the inner. So we have our salaries, table, row, cell, border, inner. How much longer of a class name can we create today? We can always rename stuff though, so we're just getting these established here. And this will be width, yeah, inline size, 100%. So an important thing is to be like sensitive to if stuff like this feels clunky, because you don't just want to accept that as the case. We need block size to be 100% as well. In that case, maybe this will have the specific block size, and this will just wrap around that. Okay, so there, we finally achieved it. But quite a bit of, you know, magic prefixing and magic pseudo elements to get there. So in order to match that, we would need to also include our last of type in that, and, you know, feel out if we really want to do this. So what's interesting too is that the last of type, that would need to be our end value on the inline. Okay, so we have those in place. Yeah, so it is possible to achieve, but we'll want to question that because that was a little bit gnarly to get in place. And let's see here, just a few more minutes and then we'll wrap up. So let's see if we can get some of this typography styled, and then that'll be it for now. So we have bold text on our name here, basically. And our content, we have to look at the rendering of this because we must have that styled separately, looks like. Yeah, you can see with this library, it didn't give us much access. This is our older code. It didn't give us much access to the internals. So we have to do all these nth child selectors to get this styled up. So that'll have to be the approach for that. And it may be the same for that table head cell as well. So let's just verify as we wrap up here. We have nice left alignment within these. We have that inset padding for our visually faked borders. And then one last thing before we wrap up is let's right align salary as a table head cell, and let's use tabular numbers to make these numbers more comparable visually. So that'll probably be the last thing that we can tackle here for today. So this would be in our table head. If we go up a bit, we want our table head cell, and the last of type on this, we want to say that the text align is going to be end. So that'll bring salary to be right aligned. Okay, looks good. And now let's do the same on our table row cell. So we'll grab this, and this will be our row cell, text align end. And the last thing we want to do is, I think it's font variant, numeric, tabular nums. And so if I set that, what that does is it's almost like a monospace font treatment where the width of each numeric character is always the same amount. And so anytime you're comparing numeric values, it's good to right align them and then use tabular numbers. What that means is that you, as kind of a column, you can go down this and keep track of how many digits are in that value. So you can see like the 1 on this aligns with the 9 on that, so we know that we have an additional digit. Without this value, or without this variation of the font, you can have things like a ton of 1s might actually look narrower than something that has fewer digits. So if I were to modify this just in our DevTools here, let's just put a bunch of 1s in place. And you can see that that visually looks narrower than something that has fewer digits. So I always use tabular nums anytime you're comparing values, because now it's very easy to see that this is a bigger number, and it not every font has it, but it's worth engaging if your font does include it. So yeah, so didn't get super far with it, but you can kind of see that this is a very iterative process, and you can also see that tables are a pain sometimes, but I think that'll do it for today. And this was fun. I appreciate all the recommendations, people coming in clutch in the chat. So that was really helpful. And yeah, maybe we'll do more of these, and I'll see you next